So I've opened up the mop image in the hair folder to be able to add this image to our composite that we're creating with the ostrich head. Now I flipped the ostrich head so it was facing the other direction, so I want to do the same thing with the mop that I'm going to use for the hair. So I'm going to first release this layer, unlock this layer by double clicking on it, changing the name to mop. Click OK, and now that layer is unlocked and I can go to the Edit Transform menu and flip that horizontally. I'm going to also zoom in a little bit so I can see what I'm doing a little bit better. Using the hand tool to move the image up on the screen, you can hold down the space bar at any time when you're on any tool and automatically get the hand tool by just holding down the space bar, which is very handy. Okay, so now I want to try and select just this hair, the mop hair. So I'm going to use the same tools I did when I selected the ostrich head. I'm going to go to Select, select my subject, and that's going to select, since we have an object here on a fairly plain background, it's going to select the major object in the image, which is the mop head. And I'm going to, excuse me, just like I did in the ostrich selection, I'm going to go to Select, Select and Mask to refine that selection. And once I'm in the Select and Mask interface, I'm going to come up here to View and choose Overlay so that I can get a sort of quick mask view of what's selected and what's not. There are a number of other views here. If I choose black and white, you can sort of see that I have a pretty good selection, but it's not as fine and accurate as it could be. So I'm going to go back to the Overlay view, come up here to the top of the window to the Options palette for this particular tool, and click Refine Hair. And that will do a much better job of selecting those little fine hairs of the mop. I can double check that by coming back here to black and white, and you can see that I indeed do have a much better exterior selection there of all those little fine hairs. Go back to Overlay, and I still have a couple of things that I want to try and remove from this image. I don't want the mop handle in there, but I think what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and remove that using the quick mask option that I showed you in class. So for now we will accept that change by clicking OK, right? And that will turn that into a selection, which I can now copy, Control C or Command C from the keyboard, edit, copy from the menu. Come back to our demo image here and Command or Control V to paste that into the image. You can see that it's come in down here above my background layer and behind everything else. You can change the interaction of these layers by dragging those layers around. So if I wanted it to be in front of the man's body, which I clearly do not want it to be, I would drag it up above, and if I wanted to completely cover up all the other images, I could do that. But I want it to be back down in the layer stack, just above the background layer, which is where it was initially. Now clearly it's a little too large, so I want to try and adjust that size so that it fits my head of my ostrich a little bit better. But before I do that, I think I want to try and clean up the mop handle, so I'm going to try and remove that. In order to see that more clearly, I'm going to hide the other layers. So I'm going to hide the layer with the man on it by clicking the eyeball out here in the Layers palette, as well as hiding the ostrich layer by clicking the eyeball out, and now I just have the mop and the handle that I can work on pretty easily. Okay, so with my mop head made visible here, and I'm going to try and edit that. I want to try and get rid of this handle. I'm going to try and do that using the quick mask mode that we looked at in class. And the quick mask mode is a way to use the brush tools, painting with black or white, to change a selection. So we need to have a selection in order to change the selection. So I'm going to re reintroduce the selection that I had for the mop, and I can do that by control clicking or command clicking on the Mac on the layer with the mop head in it. So I think I told you in class that you can do this in the channels palette as well. If you control click on a channel, it will load that channel as a selection. It's a shortcut to do that. You can also do that in layers. Let me just deselect that and go back to my layers palette. Excuse me. You can also do that in layers, and instead of loading a mask, it will load only the opaque pixels in that layer. Since I have my mop head cut out of that layer and a transparent background, let me just hide my background layer for a moment. You can see that with just the mop head layer selected, I have the mop head and transparency. And if I control click or command click on that image, I can load the opaque pixels, just the pixels of the mop, as a selection, which works really well in this case. So I'm going to go back and turn my background layer back on. So with my image selected, I'm going to go into the quick mask mode. The quick mask mode is here at the bottom of your tool palette, and if I click on that, it shows me the image that is selected. So in this case, I want to deselect this part of the image that is the handle. So I'm going to use a paintbrush to do that, B for the brush tool key, and I want to use white paint because black paint would add to the selection, right? That's not what I want. Control Z. I want to use white paint to subtract from the selection. So I'm going to make white my foreground color here, increase the size of my brush tool a little bit, and you can see as I drag along there that that is being removed from the selection. And we'll just come through here and just really quickly and easily zoom in just a little bit, use my hand tool with the space bar to drag that down and go through and remove this handle from that selection using the paintbrush tool, and maybe decrease the size of my brush a little bit to get some of these smaller areas until I'm sure that I've removed all of that. Now I've got a little bit here that I want to put back in. I can switch back to having black as my foreground color, and that will allow me to paint those selections back in if I've gone over a little bit too much. Right, so I'm just going to paint those sections back in. Okay, one more spot down here, and that is looking good. Now, if I go back to my out of my quick mask mode by hitting the Q key, that's going to become a selection, and you can see that that part of the image has been removed from the selection. Now, if I want to get rid of that, I can create a layer mask here by clicking on the layer mask, and there you go. We now have our selection of just the hair, and the mop has been removed, and we have created a layer mask. Let me just undo that real quick so you can see what I did. Anytime you have a selection loaded, you can use that selection as a layer mask by clicking on the layer mask button. So I'm just going to click on the layer mask button, and that loads that selection as a layer mask and knocks out that mop handle. All right, now I want to use this as the hair for the ostrich, so I'm going to turn my layers back on here, right, so that I can fit that more closely to the ostrich's head. One of the things that I'm going to need to do is reduce that mop in size. So making sure that I've got that layer selected, I'm going to click back on my pixels rather than the mask, and I'm going to resize those pixels in the image by going to Edit, Transform. In this case, I'm going to use Free Transform, Control T or Command T from the keyboard, and that gives me control handles around that mop. And if I hold down the Shift key to constrain the proportions, as I click and drag on the corner point, I can make that the size that I want. Okay, so I'm going to make that a little bit smaller. That looks pretty good right there. And I have successfully given this ostrich some hair. Click Return to accept those changes. Right, if I wanted to, I could grab that little section of hair here. I could just copy that. So let's turn off those other layers real quick, show you how to do that. I'm just going to grab my polygonal lasso tool, or maybe we'll just use the regular lasso tool. And with those pixels selected, I'm going to just drag a rough selection around that part of the image. All right. And I'm going to copy that with Command or Control C, and then I'm going to paste that in as a new layer. So Edit, Paste, and that is going to come in. Unfortunately, it's come in with part of the mop handle. It's come in on a new layer, so I'm going to call that, we'll call that Hair 2. And I'll rename this layer down here as just hair. And again, I need to create a layer mask so that I can mask out that handle that came in with my rough selection. It's easy to do. Just going to add a layer mask to that layer that the hair section is on, and then I can use my black paintbrush to paint out that section. Sorry, I'm using white paint. I need to flip that, so I'm using black paint, and then that will allow me to mask out that section. You're seeing a little bit of a double image come through there because, as you recall, this section is also present in the Hair 1 layer, but having it in the Hair 2 layer allows me to move it around. So I can take that section and I can move it wherever I want it, right? Because I've put it on a new layer. And the mask will follow, because it's connected, will follow those pixels. So I'm going to turn the person and the ostrich back on, and in this way I can take this section, right? As long as I've got this layer selected and I've got the pixel selected, I'm going to go to the Move tool. I was invoking the Move tool from the keyboard by holding down the Control key. So just like what you can invoke the Hand tool by holding down the space bar, you can invoke the Control key or the Move tool, use the Control key to invoke the Move tool or the Command key on the Mac at any point, no matter what tool you're on. So I'm going to drag that up behind his neck there. And I think that does a nice job of sort of framing his face. So I'm going to leave that there. Okay, so we've gotten quite a bit farther now. We've added some hair. We've got 4 different elements going on. And I'm going to add a couple more elements to finish this image out.